that you hold the pen. What will you write today? What do you have to say?
You ask such questions that are way more personal than your average podcast. I like going to deeper places. That's why we do music, and that's where our music comes from. Getting to do an interview that feels like music, that's beautiful.
Today's guests are best known for their work on The Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim. Please welcome to the Zoom composer Stephen Gallagher. Hello,
Julia, hi. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me and for having your next guest on at the same time.
Please also welcome producer and engineer Mark Willsher.
Hi, Julia.
Hi,
Hey, Mark.
Stephen.
how's it going?
Very well.
I am so honored to be talking to both of you today. I have so many questions about your work. I don't even know where to begin. So actually, thank you for your time. That's where I'll begin.
Thank you for yours. Thanks for having us, Julia.
Of
It's
course.
nice to meet you.
Yes. Where are both of you from?
I'm from Wellington, New Zealand. Mark Willsher is originally from, well, he's actually lived in quite a few places, but at the moment he's in London.
I'm in London in the UK. And despite the fact it doesn't sound like it, I was actually born in the UK.
Oh, wow.
I just spent a large portion of my life in Canada and California. So
And when did music become a part of both of your lives?
For me, pretty late, really. Probably around like 11, 12 for me. Because I remember watching a video um, for a band called Duran Duran playing when I was a kid and just going, oh my goodness, this is amazing. And before that, I was really into like breakdancing, Beat Street, electronic music, things like that. What about you, Mark?
I'm learning something on this call.
Oh,
For me, it was about the same age, actually. It was in middle school, and it was a little more mundane. It was that the middle school I went to had a music program, and I had the choice between music, visual art, or drama, and I decided to learn an instrument,
What instrument?
a trumpet at the time.
Oh, very cool. Do you remember what your first dream was as a child?
I remember when I was younger, we moved to Tokyo. So when I was like three, between the ages of
Wow.
3 and 6, I lived in Tokyo, and I do remember. I don't know if it was my first dream, but I remember dreaming of monsters living under the staircase in our building, and that was kind of fueled by the fact that there were kids in the building who were telling me not to walk around the corridors by myself because there were like the monsters hiding and they would get you. And I do remember having a horrible dream about being chased by a monster.
Why did you move to Tokyo?
It was my dad's job. He was working with a company called the Bank of New Zealand at the time, and they moved him to Tokyo to do some work there.
How
Which
long did you
was
live there for?
like 2.5, 3 years.
Do you remember
Um,
it?
yeah, really well. It's kind of like a formative period in my life. Yeah, I know I have really fond memories of it. It's sort of I don't have too many memories of being in New Zealand as a small kid. Like most of my earliest memories are from Japan.
Wow. How about you, Mark?
My first, well, I kind of like Stephen, I don't know if it was my first dream, but the first dream that I can remember, which is one I had multiple times as a small child. My mother was she didn't do this professionally, but she did a lot of dressmaking, and she had one of the sort of human forms in their bedroom to do this stuff on. And it's not actually that was the scary part. It was that I kept having this dream that someone broke into the house and that I stopped them by throwing this form down the stairs and them thinking that someone was attacking them and running away.
Oh, wow.
I
Amazing.
don't know why I had this dream several times.
How long have you guys known each other for?
Was it 2012 or 2011, Mark?
2012.
2012, that's when we met. We met on the when we were working on a
First
film
Hobbit.
called First Hobbit movie, yeah.
Wow, secrets are revealed on this interview.
Shocking.
It's funny, whenever I ask that question, some people, interpret it as like a dream in that sense, and some people interpret
Mm,
it as the first, I don't know.
ambition.
And yeah, exactly. So what would
Yeah.
be your earliest
Earliest ambition?
ambition? Yeah.
Probably. I mean, my earliest ambition was just to get as much ice cream as I could possibly get. Really. That was probably the sum total as a kid. But I think my grandfather is an Air Force pilot, and I think probably one of my early ambitions was to be a pilot. That still might work out. I don't know.
I for a long time wanted to be, from when I was very small until probably sometime in high school, wanted to be a scientist. Early, when I was a kid, it was a chemist, and then it changed when I got older. But the thing that I remember when I was a child, and I decided this, but I mispronounced a word. And I went around my dad's work telling everyone that when I grew up, I wanted to work in a lavatory and didn't understand why they found it so funny.
Oh, that's great.
That's brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant. Mark, I
Told
think you would
you.
make an amazing scientist, by the way. I think you'd be incredible.
Who broke the news?
My dad
Oh.
is a bee.
Speaking of parents, did yours encourage your musical interests or encourage a possible career path in the arts?
My parents were always really, uh, yeah, really supportive, actually. I'm still kind of a little in awe of that because if like my dad worked in banks, right? So if you've grown up from age 18 sweeping the floor of a bank to then sort of making your way up the ladder and kind of running it, you have a certain idea about the workplace, and if your son comes up and says, I think I want to give this music thing a go, the difference between your career path and your son's. I mean, I'm just trying to put myself in his shoes and look at the music industry and how sort of uncertain and how nebulous it can be. And knowing all of that, going, yeah, sure, go for it. They never said, you know what, just have you thought about real estate? Have you thought about going into real estate? But anything like that. They were always, yeah, really, really supportive. Mark Willsher?
My parents were very much the same. I mean, I feel very fortunate. They were very supportive of the music, and really never it was like whatever I wanted to do, they were ready to support. Oddly, in high school, actually, it was the guidance counselor who tried to coach me on, there are other career paths. I listed a variety of options that maybe I should consider instead of music. But my parents were always like, you want to do music? Okay, great.
Oh, that's amazing.
Now, does this
I,
counselor know that you're a Grammy winner?
Now, no, I don't even remember their name to be honest, but
Oh, you should send them an email and just a photo of you holding the Grammy.
dearest Terence, your otherwise excellent advice was marred by the fact that
Did that impact you, Mark, or it just kind of was like, whatever, they don't really know me?
I remember at the time being just kind of annoyed and feeling that I felt like that they should be there to support and what it is that people want to do and talk about, if they wanted to talk about practical things about career paths, say within music or things to be prepared for or something, but to try and talk me out of it, which is what they did, I thought was really kind of sad. Um,
yeah.
but it didn't, that upset me, but it didn't make me question or what I wanted to do.
Who were those mentors, people that you either had personally in your life or just people that you looked at in the media that were those North Stars for you of I can do this?
For me, because, when I came back to New Zealand and I was living here, there weren't too many North Stars from within the country. The country is really tiny. So when I was there's like 5 million people here, and a career in music seemed like such a long shot. There were, I guess, there were sort of the perennial kind of favorites like Split Enz, Neil Finn, who are obviously making kind of waves on the international scene. But really, the people that I've found like real like mentors and people who I've learned so much from. Well, obviously Mark Willsher is one of them. Prior to meeting Mark, there was a composer here who's still here, whose name is David Lowe. He was a really big influence and mentor on film composing and just being a good human being. A guy called Chris Ward, who was like just one of my absolute sound design heroes. He used to work in theater when I was working in theater, and he got me my first job as a music editor on a film called The Lovely Bones because he was one of Peter Jackson's dialogue editors. And previous to that, there was like, someone called Dayton Leckner who I worked with in TV when I was doing effects and dialogue for TV. I've just been lucky to have good people. Yeah, like really fortunate, especially in a country this size. I guess the advantages of being in a country this size is that people with shared interests, it's easy to find them, and generally 9 times out of 10, they're generous and nice. Those have really been like, aside from my family, I think it's been like really the key influences. Mark?
When I was in high school and I knew that I wanted to pursue music, I actually started studying with a brilliant musician. I say musician first and foremost. This is the principal trumpet of the National Arts Centre Orchestra in Canada, Douglas Sturdivant. And he taught me a lot about playing the trumpet, but more importantly than that, he taught me a lot about music. When in my last year of high school, I used to have, in the summers, I would go to have lessons with him 3 or 4 times a week. And most of those lessons were really just music lessons where we would sit down and listen to old recordings of different orchestras and different players, and then we would play along with them. And it was his sort of insight into music and also just into sort of a wider variety of instruments. I mean, there were so many times when we were talking that he would be talking about something on the trumpet, but he would be referring to how like a violin player would do something, or how a pianist would do something, or how a vocalist would do something. And it was never just about the trumpet. It was about the music and the intent of the music itself. And so he was probably really at that point in my life the single biggest influence in terms of music, and so much more than just the instrument I was playing. Later on after that, probably the two biggest influences on me were on the classical sort of orchestral side was a guy named John Ergel, who unfortunately is no longer with us anymore, but he's kind of a legendary classical engineer, just a very down to earth person that I learned a lot about just about recording in general from him. And then on the other end of the spectrum, when I met actually John at an art center in Canada at the Banff Arts Center, which is where I went after I did my degree. And then I was also fortunate there to meet George Massenburg, who's another huge influence on me and still is today. And between the two of those, coming from like the classical genre and coming from the much more commercial pop world, it's really I've taken sort of all of those things and tried to combine them into one way of working, I suppose. But those three would be the biggest influences, I would say.
That's so cool. It's amazing.
When music became more than a passion, it became, what you wanted your career to be. Did you know of all of the different job opportunities, and did you see yourself doing what you're primarily doing now?
Not at all. No, I thought I just wanted to write music, but I thought it would be in the I guess traditional sense of writing for orchestra, writing for ensembles. It wasn't really until when I was studying at university there were a few people who were also interested in film scores, and one of my lecturers had written one of my favorite film scores. But film music wasn't really very present in the curriculum. But across the road was the theatre and film department. There was a girl I had a huge crush on who was a theatre student, and I was thinking, how do I, how do I get to meet her? And basically, we were talking one day, and I was like, "Hey," she was talking to me about a theatre production she was doing, and I said, "Do you need music for your theatre production?" And she said, "Yes." And I was like, "Well, I can do that." So she introduced me to the group that she was working with, and they were all such incredible people. And even though, from a different discipline, kind of excited about the same things that I was excited about, open to sort of experimenting with sounds, with form. And honestly, the collaboration was such a great time. That was sort of the first time where I thought, oh, music can serve a narrative. Music can serve a story. Music can be part of a bigger thing. There's still room to be, try things out, to be experimental, to not just do sort of the obvious kind of things. That was a big turning point in going, oh, okay, cool. This is something that I really want to do. As far as a job, like in music editing, I had no idea music editing was even a job. I was trying to get a job at Park Road Post Production, which is Peter Jackson's post-production facility in Wellington. I was trying to get a job as a dialogue editor. I remember taking a call from my friend Chris one day, and he said, "Oh, we've got a film, and we're working with a composer, and I know you're a big fan of his, and I know that you know his work. Would you like to come in and maybe help us out putting the temp score together?" And I was like, "Yeah, okay, cool. Who's the composer?" He said, "Oh, it's a guy called Brian Eno." It was like one of my total heroes. That's how I found out what a music. Well, that was the beginning of working as a music editor. Prior to that, I had no idea that it even was a job that someone could do. It was kind of a revelation sitting down going, "What about you're gonna pay me to do this? This is amazing." What about you, Mark? Like, what was your experience?
I mean, similar in some ways, but also different. When I went to university, I wanted to play in an orchestra. That's what I wanted to do. I was pretty single-minded about it. There weren't, different types of performing things I thought I might be interested in. I wanted to play in an orchestra, and that's what I thought I was gonna, you know, do. But quite by chance, when I was in university, in my second year, I needed a job. And the music department was looking to hire a student to do concert lighting and recording for recitals and smaller events. And so I applied to this job. I didn't know anything about either, and I got the job. I sort of learned these like really super basic things that I needed to learn in order to be able to do what was expected. But I got kind of into it. I found this old BBC engineering handbook from the 70s in the closet in the recording booth at the school. And so I sort of took that home because no one had looked at it in years, and sort of and spent my nights reading that, and also spent a lot of time hanging out with the Canadian broadcasting engineers who would come to do the bigger concerts. Sort of it was quickly something I became interested in, but what ended up happening was is that I guess I was reasonably good at it because more and more people, both students and faculty, kept coming to me to ask me to record them and record their stuff rather than the people who were there who were paid to do that. What that meant is that over the rest of my degree, I ended up spending less and less time practicing and playing and more time doing recordings. At the time, I actually used to play in the orchestra and record the orchestra, which was quite funny
Whoa.
because I'd like run out during rehearsals and like when I had long rest to check how things were sounding and balance things and then run back to my seat and play. Um, but so by the time I got to the end of my degree, I had sort of unintentionally shifted from I'm going to play to actually I want to do production. And this is what I want to do. And then at that point, though, still, like I wanted to, I wanted to make records. I wasn't interested in film at that point. And it's not, I shouldn't, like, it's not that I wasn't interested in film. Film's a whole other thing. I wasn't thinking about film as a job. At that point, I was like, okay, I'm going to make records. And then it was kind of, I went into this postgraduate program in Banff and ended up moving to California. And I did a whole variety of work, but I was still really focused on music. And then the film stuff came up completely by chance. And it was basically that a pretty big client was looking for someone, and their two main requirements were that they wanted someone who had a classical training, who was a competent engineer, and who used Pro Tools, which no one in the classical world used Pro Tools at the time. But I kind of straddled both. I used the stuff that classical people done, but I had spent a lot of time in LA doing rock and roll and country records, and sort of at that time, Pro Tools wasn't a thing. And so I'd actually like had to learn how to use it because people started to want it, but studios at the time didn't have it. Anyway, so this opportunity came along for, the classical guy who knew Pro Tools, which back in the mid 90s didn't really exist. And so then I got this job on this film, and I did kind of a test run. And then the reason that had come about was actually because of Lord of the Rings. So then I kind of got thrown in the deep end, and then went from
Wow.
there.
And that's how you came to New Zealand for the first time, right?
It was how I came to New Zealand for
Yeah.
the first time.
But I didn't meet you when you first came down. It wasn't until the harbour
That's right.
that we got to meet. But I do remember being at Park Road years before you came down, and people all through the building just talking about you in sort of hushed and hallowed terms, going, Mark Willsher's amazing. He saved our film. So I was like, who is this guy? I'd really like to meet him.
So cool. What if like you're not working on a project, are you writing for yourself? How does that work?
Julia, that's a great question. If I'm not working on a project, I like to still keep making and writing, and because I mean, it's a clumsy metaphor, but it's like going to the gym, right? The more you go, the more work you put in, the more agile and strong one becomes in terms of like being able to deploy musical ideas and software and hardware and things. It's if I'm not on a project, there's lots of research or lots of trial and error to be done with machines, with software. But also just listening to music as well, listening and sort of seeing how things work. Again, like where we live like right next door to a bird sanctuary in Wellington. So it's a lot of time spent outdoors, wandering, listening to that. So broadly speaking, if I'm on a project, it's probably like longer hours. So I'm probably in this room from maybe like 7 o'clock through till maybe midnight, depending on the deadlines. But when there's less pressure, it's sort of like I still like being in here, but I try and go out and see some daylight from time to time and drink a lot of tea. That's pretty much it. Mark Willsher, what's yours like?
The only time I'm ever really outside of my own place is when we're recording, or when we're on a final film mix. But otherwise, I pretty much do everything here, which is a studio that conveniently I built in my garden about a year before COVID hit. And when I built it, I was not expecting to be in it all the time. But then we had a pandemic, and it was super fortuitous because I could keep working. And then since then, it's now kind of just, my clients are used to that's sort of normal. And so now I spend most of my days here. The length of my days tends to vary. I mean, they get broken up by taking the dogs out and doing things with the dogs. I have in certain parts of productions, it can be like Stephen said, where it can be, I'm still out here at midnight or 1 a.m. getting stuff ready. If I'm in a more creative point in the production, like if I'm mixing or something, I tend to, and this is quite a luxury, I tend to try and not mix for more than about 6 hours a day. Because more than that, you start to get tired from listening. It's harder to focus, and it's sort of just more difficult to be productive. But that is actually one of the things that's turned out to be fortuitous about having my own room, because it allows me to spread stuff out. Because in a lot of cases with projects, it's not that everything, say, has to be done in a week. It's just that that's what the budget can afford if we're actually going into a facility that we have to pay for daily. Um, but if people are paying me and I've got a bunch of different things I can do and I'm working in my own space, it allows me that kind of luxury of just focusing for a reasonable amount of time. But other than that, I mean, it's I live in North London. We have a lot of parks here, so there's a lot of decent walks I can do from the house.
And decent coffee options, let's be honest. Like,
Well, that's in my kitchen though.
that is true. You make amazing coffee.
It's not it's odd in a sense because I mean I'm about 6.5 miles from the center of London, but most days I'm sort of out here where I mean I'm in a suburb, but I might as well be, I could be in the middle of anywhere. But the advantage of being here is that I can go into town for lunch and have meetings, or it makes that kind of side of things very easy in terms of staying in contact with colleagues in the industry at large because there's so much here. I don't know if this is really answering the question of what I do.
Yeah. How did you guys meet, and how do projects come along? Is there an audition process? Is it just who you know?
Well, to answer your first question, we met in Wellington during the first Hobbit movie. So as I said before, people like were just anytime the subject of a music editing came up, Mark's name was invariably sort of like presented as, and this is the guy, this is he's amazing. So I was like, oh, I really hope I get to meet him one day. And then he came down for the first Hobbit movie. Mark, I remember meeting you for the first time and just saying, oh, hey, I've heard a lot about you, and would there be any chance of being able to just, if it's convenient, me coming in and just watching you work? And you stopped and you looked at me and you're like, okay. And then I went into your room, and in with that 15 seconds, you were doing things in Pro Tools I've never seen anyone else do. I never even knew were possible. And I was like, oh my God, everything they say about this guy's true. He's amazing. And then we're both working in the music department, so we got to see a lot of each other. We started hanging out, and it's like not only is Mark an amazing music editor, he's also a great guy, and not just a friendship formed over those films really, and some I mean those films went on for what? You were on that for 3 years, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And no, and after those, after we worked together on the Hobbit movies, there was I think I can't remember what it was. I was working on a film, a documentary, and I was telling Mark about it. And he kindly offered to mix the music for me. And that was sort of the beginning of our collaboration relationship, really. How's that how you remember it, Michael? I got the details completely wrong. And
No, that I mean that's pretty much how I remember it. I mean, we definitely, I mean, obviously, working on those films where, our department, our music department was effectively 4 people in terms of in New Zealand, because the rest
yeah.
of the music on the second and third films were slightly different, but on the first film, pretty much everyone was in London except for 4 of us in New Zealand, of which I was the only one who wasn't in New Zealand all the time.
Mhm.
And so, obviously we spent a lot of time together on those films over the years. And yeah, I mean, it was pretty much, that's basically how I remember it. And I mean, when I was down there, you played me some of your stuff. And I remember, you did because you'd also done some of the songs for those films.
Oh, for the whole, yeah, that's right.
As that you'd
Yeah.
written the torture song and
Oh, Blunt the Knives. And, yeah, right. Yeah.
yeah, and so I don't really remember what it was, what exactly how it came about, but you were working on something that you were composing, and we ended up talking about it, and you sent it up to me, and then from there we just kind of kept doing that.
Yeah. No,
But and in terms of though, sort of adding on to that, like I guess I'll go first on the how work comes in question, and you can follow up. But largely in the terms of the work we do together, primarily it ultimately comes to Stephen, because as the composer, he's kind of the first port of call in terms of the creative voice that people are looking for, and he's got the community. He's very, I say he's right here. Stephen's very, Stephen's a very significant part of a small family of people, I would say, in New Zealand who are kind of involved in the film music world. And so, he's done quite a lot of work for various New Zealand productions, and also for stuff that's come in through Park Road, or like the things for Weta Digital for their promotional stuff. And then also there's been, and sometimes stuff comes in work from elsewhere, but like the Canadian producer or Canadian director that we've done quite a few projects with now, Lisa Ovies. For the most part, historically, they've been things that have come to Stephen or come to us. And at this point in time, we're sort of starting to, we've done a whole bunch of stuff now, and I think we're trying to be like, okay, now let's actually be a little more proactive, um, and sort of make this, rather than this be ad hoc as stuff comes along. Let's see what we can actually drum up and go after. But I mean, I think it's fair to say that, like probably, I'm sure, like many industries, like a large part of it is simply the network of people you know. And it's, either people contact you because they've seen or heard something you've done that they really like, or they've had a recommendation, or there's someone I know for myself, I can't, you know, the, I mean, I get a reasonable number of calls these days in terms of, based on what I've done historically, but there's still a not insignificant amount of work I do that just happens because I happen to walk into a coffee shop and someone I know is there, and we chat, and then the next day something happens and they need something,
Yeah.
and I was the last person they spoke to that they know who did that. And it's not to say I wouldn't have been on their list anyway, but there is that, like, that sort of constant communication and just being on people's minds that is really probably the most significant part, I think.
100% agree. Yeah.
Anything,
All of that.
any
Yeah.
industry. What is something that you wish you knew when you were starting your career?
It's such a long list. Um, Thinking in broad terms, communication. I think it's a small thing, but it would have been very helpful. Is that Mark and I are musically trained, right? Which means we're a fay with a number of musical technical terms and terminology and musical language. When you talk with clients, or majority of people who don't study music don't engage with music or listen to it or think of it in technical terms. And so for me, I think a really small but helpful thing would have been to know that there's different ways of talking about music as a composer or as someone who's working in a music team to help serve a story or help serve a director's vision. There's no official proper way to talk about music with regards to composing it for film, for TV. I feel like if you're with a director or the creative, any way they want to talk about music is the right way to talk about it. And it's up to you, it's up to our job to sort of help to translate that into tangible, appropriate musical material. So if a director's saying, I want it to sound more Byzantine, or I want it to sound more kind of flaky pastry, or I want it to sound like the dirt under my fingernails after coming home from a field archaeological site in Western Sumatra at 2 o'clock on a Friday. All of that is legitimate language, and part of the fun of the job is sort of decoding that and forming that secret language and actually sort of like exploring what it means. It's a small point, but and actually, Julia, fundamentally, that's really to empower directors and producers to feel like they don't need to worry about the technical aspects of music. That's what we do. That's our job. But they should also feel absolutely empowered and free to speak about music in any way they want, because any way they want to do it is the correct way.
Well, this is probably kind of an odd thing, but I would say that I wish I had known earlier on to be nicer. Um,
At what point were you not nice? Is there
well,
like a Mark Willsher before I met you and a like what?
well, I mean, look, I'm not exactly the most social person to begin with, but I think, when I was younger, I used to have this mindset that I just needed to do the best possible job. And I remember actually someone that at the time I sort of actually took on board, and I wished I'd never heard, which was someone once told me that I didn't really need to worry about being friendly, because people just remembered the success. They didn't remember how
Oh,
they didn't remember the making of. They only remembered the success of the final result.
ooh.
And I think the reality is that is partly the case on stuff that is like wildly successful, but on the majority of things, it's really not the case. And the other thing is that the reality is that there are, it's easy when you're very young, to think like, oh, I know everything and I'm like fully on top of all of this. I think as most people probably do at some point. But the thing is, at any point in time, like there's tons of people who can do an equal or a similar job. And simply doing it well is not going to be enough when there are a whole bunch of other people who are actually like nice to be around.
Mm.
Yeah,
Um,
don't be a dick, right?
yeah.
That's
And
simple.
so I wish I had you know thought about that more
Mm.
as a young,
Oh man.
even apparently didn't know me. Um,
No, this is a shock to me actually. I'm trying to imagine you what did you carry like a switchblade or how mean like were you packing heat? I mean what's the
I mean, there were times when when we were in teams and I had a certain amount of control over the teams, that I was unreasonable in what I expected people to do.
I that shocks me to hear that actually, Mark. I actually have a hard time imagining you like that because as far as I've known you, you've always been like lovely and and really kind
I'm very, very glad to hear that, but that took time.
of oh man, no, I mean yeah, that absolutely shocks me. But I absolutely hear what you're saying. Like that's a really important thing. Like making a film or making anything is hard enough and dealing with people who are yeah, people who can be dicks. It's just life's too short for that sometimes.
It is.
I really appreciate you sharing that. That's vulnerable, and I think that's such incredible advice for any field, you know?
Well, don't you, Julia? Don't you think there's like this? I mean, in your career, right? Like, have you encountered people who, because they have a position or they have their job, that they forget to be a good human being? They're like,
Of
you know,
course. Of
yeah,
course. And even their amount of talent doesn't matter at that point. You're
yeah,
talking you're on people that
yeah,
I enjoy. Yeah, of course.
100%. And does that? I mean, how does that affect you? Does that make you want to work for that person again, or is that sort of making the process better? Is it helpful in any way?
No, of
That kind of
course not. if anything, it's a great example of, how when you hope to be in that position, you don't want to lead.
There you go. Yeah, 100%. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. I feel like, I mean, look, I feel privileged anytime I get to work with Mark, and when we launched Scorecraft, it was basically a vehicle for the two of us to continue work in a more kind of like, we're basically formalizing the situation, right? But and it's also, and I hope Mark doesn't mind me saying this, but it's also an attempt to keep the team that we had on War of the Rohirrim sort of together as a unit, because man, it's such amazing, great people. Um, like Mark introduced me to the music editor Janet Grab that he works with in London. Janet's incredible, lovely, great editor, great musician. And here we had an editor called Alana Jensen, who I'd worked with on a couple of films before, and I think she's just spectacular and super cool. Um, and people that we just want to keep working with because they're great at what they do, but also they're great people to hang out with. Just
Well, and related to that, I like, you know, ultimately trying to keep that team together is just more efficient.
that's it, 100%.
Because, everyone knows how everyone else works,
Yeah,
how things need to get done, what needs to get done when, and it's just everything is better because there's less time training, less time explaining.
absolutely. And we've all shared an experience or shared multiple experiences that we can look back on and learn from. And I guess in a small way, that's kind of, we have this institutional kind of knowledge. It's between the four of us, and you know,
And which is, I think it's worth mentioning that it is kind of, I mean, it sounds like an obvious thing for anyone who say works in like a corporate environment or an environment where like, people come and go, but a team might be together for, years or even
yeah,
their entire careers. In our world where it really is primarily everyone's independent and freelance,
yeah,
there's a lot of the same people you'll come across and work with, but invariably from project to project, it's different people in the roles and it's not always quite the same. And so it always, it takes time to sort out what that's going to be. And so if we can, do something where we have actually the same team just going from project to project, I think it should be a lot, hopefully, a very good thing.
yeah. A lot more efficient, a lot more efficacious. It means we can handle a few things at a time, which yeah, is a huge advantage as far as we can see.
For those listening who might not know, can you explain how your collaboration works and who makes what and
Yes.
just all the details?
Yeah, sure, Julia. Okay, well, let's take the War of the Rohirrim, Lord of the Rings animated film that came out at the end of last year as an example. So, and Mark will fill in, more details. But we both get a copy of the script, and we're sort of reading it, and that film had some storyboard, uh, some sequences in more kind of detailed form, but largely it was a long storyboard. We had reference artwork.
And just to say for a moment,
Yeah,
for people don't know, I mean the storyboard in this case is basically just charcoal drawings. So
yeah,
and you might be, in terms of they're assembled together like the film will be, but you might be staring at an image for 5-10 seconds before it goes to the next charcoal drawing, while you're hearing the character voices.
Like a
yeah.
comic book,
Absolutely,
right?
absolutely beautiful, beautiful drawings, but quite abstract and quite hard to visually imagine the final result from what you're seeing in front of
Like a
you.
comic book, right?
Like a comic book, but even more in some cases more like a cave painting,
Oh.
like an
Yeah.
abstract kind of etching from the mid 20th century or so you have the script, you have like a reference artwork, and you're trying to project everything that you're reading in the script, seeing in the reference artwork onto this, you know, abstract, beautiful, but not detailed picture. In this case, this is Middle Earth, and this is a an environment, a place, a culture, or multiple cultures that Mark and I are familiar with. It's a world that we've been involved in before. Mark on the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and both of us on the Hobbit trilogy. So we're starting off with a familiarity about the environment. First thing that we do that I'm hugely always grateful for is we bounce ideas off each other. We talk about the ideas. We talk about the story points. We talk about what we think the music can do. We talk about what the director's ideas that they've expressed to us, or in this case, Kamiyama-san, Kenji Kamiyama was the director. From those discussions, I start writing maybe some ideas or some demos. So one of the great things about living on the other side of the world is that I can get up in the morning, write, oh look, it's late, I go to bed, I send what I've done to Mark. So when he wakes up in the morning, he gets to hear it fresh.
Wow.
And then I in his evening, I wake up and he's listened to it, or maybe he's mixed it, or maybe he's listened to it and gone, this is actually, this is great, maybe change this, or this is the worst thing I've ever heard in my life. Or, usually it's not that harsh. But but then we have this back and forth where I get a break from it. Mark comes in with fresh ears. We have another discussion around this, and I can refine some things, send this to Mark, and then Mark. At this point, these things are sort of just demos, ideas. But Mark takes these and sort of mixes them. Do you want to talk about that process, Mark? Like in terms of at that point, dealing with these demos that are generated with samples and synthesizers and.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that we kind of do is divide and conquer a little bit in that, one of the things in today's production world of music is that becomes, I think, relatively taxing actually on composers is that you're not only writing the music, but you're in effect having to produce and create all these demos that then are what actually people are judging. And so your time gets divided and you can't just purely focus on the creative, music writing you need to do because you've always got to get it into a form to present. So effectively what, Stephen I think it's fair to say, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, you can basically work, as you're inspired to do, putting out the stuff, not really worrying about the balance of it. Does it all sit together perfectly? It's like, is the idea there? Is this presenting what it needs to? And then Stephen, can fire all of that out to me. So I get a bunch of audio files of a whole bunch of different MIDI instruments and different things. And then I'll go through, and if it basically try to make them sound as good as possible. And then I'll also like I take, the stuff that we've discussed and what I think is my interpretation of Stephen's intent is what is written. And then I'll do things with that to try and enhance things and make things clearer. If there's a melody that should be is some important theme to make sure that comes up so that the director pays attention to it. I might edit it to the picture slightly differently if I feel it doesn't, sit as well as it might around the dialogue or something else. And then Stephen will also at that point, like will tend to put in perhaps more than is needed. And so at that stage as well, if when I'm putting it up again, with everything in a way that we're going to present it to the director, maybe some element is a little too much, or it feels like it's going to interfere with the dialogue or something. So I might take it out or make a change, edit change, which are all things that then I punt it back to Stephen and he gives his own comments on it. But it kind of goes back and forth in that. But it ultimately, it sort of allows, like, I can worry about how does this sound in terms of what we're presenting to the director. And Stephen can really more just purely focus on the creative composition side of it and not have to worry so much about, like, is the brass balance right? Does this French horn sample sound good?
The Peruvian nose flute's muted for any particular reason.
Removes a little bit of that over.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing I would say is that it's a real privilege to have the ability to talk with Mark and bounce ideas back and forth and present things, in a safe space before they go out to the director and producer. That feels that's an amazing situation, and I'm really grateful. It's something I'm tremendously grateful for because it sort of just takes another layer of stress off.
Mhm.
Um, so from there, like once the music once we have the director is happy with what we're doing. The next step is sort of in the War of the Rohirrim was planning the recording, and that was a huge challenge for us because the film is like 2 hours. I think it's 134 minutes, maybe. So, okay, a little
But
over 2 hours
with credits.
with credits, right? Yeah, okay. And I think it's about just over 2 hours worth of music,
Yeah.
and fully orchestral, large ensemble um, arrangements. So there
And
was a
that
lot of music, a lot of music to write, and how do I put it? We didn't have the resources that were available to the Lord of the Rings trilogy or the Hobbit trilogy. Um, and so I guess the next step in our plan, our next collaboration is planning how we're actually going to do what needs to be done with the resources that we have available.
Mm.
And I mean, Mike can talk to it about on a technical level, but in broad terms, the sound of Howard Shore's score that he made in collaboration with Peter for the Lord of the Rings trilogy and for the Hobbit is a sound of like about 100 musicians in a really big space, 100 orchestral musicians in a big space. So I know that may be more. There may be like up to I guess 200 when you count in the choir and the non-Western instruments. It's a lot of instruments in a really big space. We in Wellington, that part of the deal that for doing the score was that it had to be recorded in Wellington or in New Zealand. Sorry, the NZSO, which are the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra, their base is in Wellington, but our options on recording in a large space were fairly limited because the town hall where part of the Rings was recorded and some of the Hobbit movies were recorded is undergoing earthquake strengthening, and they're also building in some new rooms into that space. So that was out. Next door to that is a building called the Michael Fowler Center, which it's a concert hall. It's not a recording space, and it was just so far out of our budget that we couldn't even imagine using it. So our options to where to record this thing came down to sort of two places, and the place we ended up choosing was it's a really beautiful chapel called Stella Maris, which is on a hill overlooking the ocean. Um, and it used to be an old kind of convent, and Sir Peter Jackson and Dame Fran Walsh bought it and restored it, and then put a recording setup inside.
Wow.
So there's this beautiful chapel. It sounds really lovely. Um, and the players from previous work we've done in there seem to enjoy playing in that space. So that was a space we had, and then it was just up to how we could achieve the sound that we wanted using the musicians that we had and the space that we had.
Mm.
And I think we started with scoring plan A, and what we ended up with doing was score plan J. That's how often we had to change our approach. But I'll let Mark talk about the challenges and the approach to doing that, because that's one really important part of the collaboration. Like, you know, um, being able to have those discussions at every single level of the process. And Mark Willsher, you sir, are right.
Well, I think, and I think in this case, it is even more so perhaps than most films because of the expectation in terms of what people were looking for. Similarly to how like all the visuals in this film were, based off a lot of original artwork from the original trilogy, it was all sort of like, it was very clear from the beginning that this was supposed to be in the same world as Peter's films, and even though it's animated, like it's sort of, it inherits the same space. There was a desire. The original version, when we were looking at it with all those charcoal drawings, had just been, it was wall to wall score from the original trilogy that had been put to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And everyone knew that they couldn't have that because there wasn't the budget for that. And also there wasn't Howard Shore. But at the same time, that was kind of the benchmark of what, they wanted it as far in that direction as was feasible within the resources we had. So, at that point, it was sort of when Stephen was writing and all, we're going through this whole demo process, we're not really at that point thinking about so much how are we going to make this work with smaller forces and recording things separately. It was more like, let's get the stuff in that's working well for the film, doing what everyone wants, is working for the director. We've got all the themes are in place, the structure's in place. And then it became a question of, okay, how can we take that and then get it into a form that, we can actually go and record with what's available to us.
Mm.
And so there was a lot of work in this case, perhaps more than usual, just in terms of figuring out how we were going to record things, how we were going to split things up. One of the things that, and the types, like a couple of examples, because this would get really boring pretty quickly. But a couple of examples where, we had to, brass was going to play a pretty big role, and we needed a pretty big brass section. And one of the problems is that we didn't actually have the size brass section in the NZSO that we really needed. And it was something that we felt like this has to play as a section. We can't record the section in sort of pieces with a smaller number of players. So that we actually ended up recording in London, where we could actually have the full section we wanted. But the bigger issue that came with that is then suddenly, like, we're recording in this chapel in Wellington, and we can only fit so many string players in, and it's a pretty small string section. And sure, we can turn it up because we're recording them on their own, but we're still like, we're going to have this big brass section and we've got this tiny string section, and it's not really going to work. And so one of the things we decided there was that we could normally, when recordings are done there for this type of thing in that venue, is about 17, 18 string players is about what you can fit comfortably in the space. So we recorded everything that way. But then what we actually did, we did an experiment. The room is really narrow, so no one ever went sideways because there wasn't any depth across the room to actually have players stacked. There's really only enough room for about 4 players back. And so what we did though was we decided, well, we'll have that sort of 17 piece, what we normally do there will be kind of like the middle of our string section in an orchestra. And then we went back, and for all the bigger cues, and it might even just be a section within a cue, maybe a climax or something where we wanted it to be bigger. Then we had a 28 piece, 28 players that we did sideways, but we kind of left a hole in the middle and spread them out, so that they effectively became the sides to this center section that we'd already recorded.
Wow.
We layered them, but we did it in a way where the orientation was different in the room.
Yeah.
And they were spread out. So that with the idea that in the end, we still don't end up with a 60 piece or equivalent like we had on the original trilogy, but we end up with a solid, 40 to 45 piece string section. which actually sounded quite good. And it was quite interesting in a few places because where we had done it just for some climaxes, it was actually kind of nice because you could have something gets louder, but as it gets louder, it also gets wider.
Yeah.
Especially in the cinema was
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
nice. You could have
Totally.
things kind of on the screen
Yeah.
and they would crescendo, but as well as getting louder, it would then come out into the room more, which
Mm.
was
I love that.
kind of a nice effect.
Yeah,
Uh,
hearing the ensemble sort of contract and expand
yeah.
over the film. Yeah, I love that. It's a cool
It's just
thing.
amazing because the average, viewer of the movie is not going to think about any of this, right? Just
Yeah,
enjoy the
100%.
music, and there's so much
Yeah.
that goes into it. It's
Yeah.
really mind-blowing, but it must feel so rewarding when you get to see the movie and think about when you saw the caveman drawings and everything that
Ah,
you've been through to
clearly.
then.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's incredible. It's an amazing journey and one we are very privileged to have done, and also one that really threw up a lot of challenges and a lot of twists and turns. And I mean, I'm thrilled with the result. Mark, I mean, your work on it is extraordinary. But what was the point for me? The point, there were 2 points along this journey where I thought, oh, this could be okay. And I think one of them was when you and I went to Tokyo and met with Kamiyama-san, the director, and my Japanese is non-existent. Your Japanese is non-existent. His Japanese is, of course, amazing, but his English is actually pretty good too. Although he tends to not speak in English. Japanese is his default sort of language. And when he was sitting there talking to us about the film, and we were sitting there, he was speaking in Japanese, the film was in front of us, and at most points, even before the translator started giving the translation, we absolutely understood what he was talking about, the heart of what he was describing. That was a point where I thought, okay, this is going to be great. And the second bit I think was when there was one cue at the end of the film called Adventure Beckons. It's basically, yeah, the dinner on the end of the film, and every person who came in to hear the track recorded or listen to Mark mix it invariably ended up crying. I
Oh,
always think that's kind of a good.
yeah.
I always think that's like a good sign.
Well, that was also a case of where like I wasn't at the point for me, like I wasn't actually done with it,
Yeah.
but like, okay, we're not going to change anything.
No.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah, when you have multiple people coming in on different occasions and listening to the same piece of music and then, asking for tissues,
Wow.
yeah, that feels you're on the right track.
So, it's been
that,
so inspiring and wonderful. Um, what do you want your legacies to be?
Wow. I haven't even thought about that. I didn't think it was in my power to decide what my legacy was going to be. Ultimately, I don't know if it's up to me, to be honest with you, Julia. Um, I mean, I what I'd like it to be is sort of like it just to matter to my family and friends, really. That's and you know what I don't even know how to answer that. I feel like that's an answer that I should have, and I should be able to give you like that, like a really snappy kind of comment. But honestly, I don't know. And now that I'm admitting that I don't know, I feel like that's something that I should really think about. So if you'll excuse me, I might not be able to answer that.
That's
Uh,
okay.
but I love the question because it's made me go off in quite a direction of thought that I wasn't expecting at this time in the morning. So thank you
Time
very
is it for
much.
you right now?
Oh, it's I mean it's 9:15 a.m.
It's still
But
early to think about your
it's well
legacy.
it's pre-coffee, so it's a little on the early side. But thanks for the question. I feel like I'm failing you by not being able to answer
No,
succinctly.
not at all.
Um,
Not at
but
all.
it's a
you're asking like
question. Yeah,
some very tough questions.
yeah. Thanks for having us on. My goodness.
It's interesting,
Mate,
completely things that we did not expect to answer.
no one's ever asked us this before. So thanks for your patience. Mark, do you have an idea in terms of a
I
legacy?
mean, I don't really have an answer to that either. I mean, but it's something that in a slightly different pers perspective, I do think about. But it's really, I mean, it's sort of more of I'd say selfish, although it's not really the right word. But to me, like, I would basically like when I'm gone, I mean, not that I will be thinking myself, but I would like to think that when I go, that my existence was worthwhile. And
Nice.
that doesn't have to be in any like lasting legacy, but it's
Yeah.
just that, you know, I would like to feel that, you know, I made good use of the time given to me.
Well, you've absolutely made my life better, and I love knowing you. It's a pleasure to know you. So, in terms of that, you
Mission,
know, mission accomplished, Mark Willsher. Uh,
but yeah,
but
that
I feel like we need to sort of like after this interview and taking inspiration from Julia's quote, maybe we need to think about getting, I don't know, statues. Statues are probably a bit, no one needs statues of old white guys anymore, but I think maybe like, you know, maybe a memorial plaque somewhere, like
a park bench
park bench. You know what? That's it. Let's just get a park. Let's get a Scorecraft park
in
bench.
Zealandia.
But in Zealandia, and maybe we can make it out of a material that resonates when the wind blows through it. So you get these amazing tones. It's like a sonic experience where people sit down, they read the names, and far from being cacophonous, it's sort of melodious. And okay, this is probably I need to go back to the drawing board and think about this, Julia. But
Oh,
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you both so much for your time. I really enjoyed getting to know you, and um,
thanks for having us.
and
Come to New
Virgo,
Zealand anytime.
first on my list for sure. Yeah, this is wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Julia. It's very lovely to talk to you. Mark Wilshire, it's always lovely to see you.
good.
And now talking of legacy, I've got to go off and give a talk to kids at school about film music.
Oh, amazing. That's beautiful. So beautiful.